Thank you so much, everyone, for coming back to this space for in the Trailblazers series, where we engage with some of the most important, pressing issues in the environmental space, where we bring in conversations in the conservation space today around climate change, around environmental protection, and so many other issue topics that are of relevance today. So the nature-based finance series, specifically on carbon credits over the past few sessions within this Trailblazers event, has been unpacking the growing role of nature-based carbon projects in climate and conservation efforts across Africa. These conversations have explored both the promise and the tensions with these approaches, from financing conservation to restoring landscapes to questions around governance, community engagement, and equitable benefit sharing. And as these projects continue to expand across the continent, one thing has become increasingly clear. The future of these initiatives will not only be shaped by policymakers, by investors or practitioners, but it's also voices and the leadership of young people and the communities they come from. Young people are increasingly engaging within these conservation spaces as researchers, practitioners, community advocates, and future decision makers, and hopefully also decision makers of today. Yet their perspectives are not always reflected in the design. And I think that's why it's important to have the talk that we're going to have today. In our previous session, Ganizani Malango spoke powerfully about how the carbon credits process and system operates and how these projects are run. And I think we needed that technical insight to fully understand and grapple with the idea of carbon credits. He used examples and about various projects that are being implemented to help communities engage and benefit from carbon credits through technology. He gave us insights on the how of carbon credits and the processes from a community perspective. So as we continue this series in nature-based finance, we must keep asking, or we should start asking if we haven't thought of these questions already. For example, where do young people feature and how are they connected to the landscape or included? And how are they empowered? So today's session creates space to bring these voices into the conversation, to reflect on what we've learned throughout this series, to raise critical questions, and to explore how young people can play a meaningful role in shaping more inclusive, accountable, and impactful nature-based carbon initiatives across the continent. So today we are here to discuss, through the lens of these carbon projects, how these carbon projects are actually working, especially around young people. So it's my honor to introduce our speaker for today, Vitumbiko Jere, or Vitu. And his talk is titled Carbon Quest, Young People's Reflections and Africa's Climate. He brings a critical and deeply grounded perspective on carbon credits. And he's also a forestry leader, an environmental management expert, and has over 10 years of experience in sustainable land management. His work focuses on forest operations, climate resilience, agroforestry, using data-driven approaches to guide large-scale resource assessments and land use planning. He's also a strong advocate for integrated natural resource management that balances operational success with long-term environmental health. So today, he joins us on culminating discussion that brings together young voices to share insights and raise critical questions on nature-based carbon projects, helping ensure that young people and their perspectives play a meaningful role in shaping Africa's climate journey. So please help me warmly welcome Vitu as he takes the floor to take us on this journey. Feel free to clap and just welcome him to the floor. Vitu, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for
You're welcome.
Opening the floor for today's talk. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be part of the series, and I have thoroughly enjoyed all the previous conversations that we have had, and I look forward to a meaningful engagement in this session. So as you have heard, my name is Vitumbiko Jere. I'm currently sitting in Lilongwe, Malawi, and today's discussion, as has already been outlined, it's around the critical issues that are affecting us in the carbon space. Like I said, today's talk is around the issues that cloud the carbon journey that we are on as young Africans, as pioneers, and as players in this industry. So basically, when we're talking about carbon credits or carbon finance or nature-based solutions which generate benefits in the form of putting a price tag on emission reductions and associated benefits that come from there. So the critical questions that we are supposed to ask firstly is, what is the main goal of such kind of projects? So overall, the original idea was that by introducing these payment for ecosystem services, that we would reverse the challenges, we would reverse the crisis that we are in, the climate change crisis, whereby the mechanism was to make it very expensive for polluters to pollute and make it profitable for those who conserve the environment and those who practice in initiatives that contribute towards low carbon results. So my topic today is Carbon Quest, Young People's Reflections in Africa. And specifically, I would like to talk about the systematic barriers that are there that we overlook sometimes. So these systematic barriers, we are there not because of the participants themselves, not because of the players, but because of the way that the system works. So that's why I thought it wise to just discuss around some of the barriers that are there, that are hurdles, that are barriers for projects that aim or promise meaningful returns or meaningful benefits for all the stakeholders that are involved. So when we're talking about meaningful carbon initiatives, we're talking about initiatives that benefit all the players that are involved, not just those that invest or buy these carbon credits, but also those that are implementing these carbon projects. And today's discussion builds on the previous discussions that we have had on different aspects of carbon finance or nature-based solutions, so to speak. And one of the barriers that I wanted to bring on the table is the high-risk investor perception that is there, and prohibitive upfront costs that we often meet once we engage or once we start developing or putting together ideas to work on a project. So what do I mean when I say the high-risk investor perception and prohibitive upfront costs? So one of the things that is a challenge with carbon projects is that these are usually probably mid-term to long-term investments, whereby the benefits of such projects will only be realized after a long period of time. And for investors, this becomes a problem, because they guarantee that this project will still yield results beyond the period that has been set is not certain in some instances, and the project has not been sold in a way that it is seen as an asset or a business asset or a business investment. The second issue is on the upfront costs that are associated with carbon projects. Basically, we are looking at the administrative fees that project implementers or project developers have to pay before even a project has kicked off. And I'm talking from examples. For example, in Malawi, for you to even get a carbon project registered or any similar type of project, there are costs, or there are costs that someone has to bear. And these costs basically can rise as high as maybe 20,000 or even more, 20,000 US dollars. And that cost for small scale implementers, for young people, is a barrier that most young people have to think of how they can navigate that barrier so that that project is realized and is registered. And the second barrier that we can talk about is the participation gap. And this is something that was discussed at length in our previous discussions: the failure of rigid top-down designs of carbon projects, of nature-based solution projects. And the problem that we often see is that most of the times the voices of young people, communities where these projects take place, are not considered in the project design itself. And you find that most often these rural communities who interact with these natural resources, rural communities who feel the ramifications in case a project goes wrong, they are usually sidelined and only come into the project later on, just for the project implementers to tick the box to comply with specific standards and specific compliance requirements. So this is a barrier that we need to find a way on how we can incorporate, or we can develop projects that are inclusive, because the needs of these communities and the needs of the implementers are different, and there has to be a balance in the way the projects are designed, instead of projects being imposed on communities. This other challenge that we often see within the space of carbon projects is the knowledge deficit, whereby there is an over-reliance on technical expertise from outside. So in the African context, you find that most of the projects, the initial development of that projects usually involve technical experts who come in at a time, and sometimes even remotely design a project that is expected to work in our local context. And that becomes a problem because they do not understand. These technical experts may not understand the social fabric within which these projects might work, and usually this becomes basically a risk multiplier, whereby there is a risk of conflict, there is a risk of abandonment if these projects do not align with the local context within which they are being implemented. The other barrier which we can look at is how do we balance the requirements that are there to generate or to collect data that is robust enough so that that project is credible, but also ensure that there is operational scalability, whereby the data is collected at a lower cost and the data is collected within the specified time. So this is another issue of how do we find a balance? What type of tools do we need to develop that will balance these two issues? And the other barrier that was talked about at length in the previous discussion is the transparency gaps in local benefit sharing mechanisms. So like we have often seen in most projects that local communities are usually the ones that carry most of the burden, most of the risk, but usually they are the least that benefit from these projects. For example, for projects that are being implemented on customary land, for example, in Malawi, out of the proceeds of that project, of what the government collects from that proceeds, only 5% is allocated to adjacent communities or communities that are where these projects are taking place. And almost maybe 85% of the proceeds, they go to the project proponent, the people that come and develop and implement these projects within our local communities. So there is an issue there whereby if these communities are not getting a fair value for their participation, for their investment in the project, it jeopardizes the long-term permanence of those carbon credits. So what do we do when we face these challenges, or what can we do to navigate these barriers and redefine the way carbon projects, nature-based solution projects are being implemented in Africa? One of the things that we could probably look to is to think of carbon projects as business investments, as business transactions. So instead of starting big, we could probably try to be a bit more agile by developing projects that are small, so that we provide the. Yeah, so I was saying one of the ways that we could probably circumvent some of the barriers that we usually face, for example, the high cost of developing and starting a carbon project, is to be a bit more agile, whereby we look at smaller projects that are robust, that really engage all the stakeholders that are supposed to be involved. By adopting a lean project development approach, we are able to generate results that are tangible, that are credible, and provide a proof of concept for that kind of a project. And that gives us a springboard from where we could now scale up that project design by incorporating other similar projects. So that's one way of circumventing the barrier that comes because of the high cost, the high transactional administrative cost of carbon projects. So additionally, instead of establishing or developing projects that are independent, especially for small scale projects, it would be wise to aggregate these projects under one program of activities or under one project, so that the costs that come from the administration of that project from the government side, the verification and validation costs, and other associated costs are shared among those projects. So that's one way of looking at it. And the second one is by reducing entry friction, de-risking early stage project implementation. Most of the costs are non-refundable, and usually they come before a project has even been accepted. So probably it's a conversation of how do we lobby for low or paying fees after the project has already been accepted. So this is something that I would love to hear what others have experienced in their local context. For example, in Malawi, there are a lot of projects that potential project developers that are looking to tap into the possible benefits that carbon finance promises. But because the project implementation stage itself from the offset causes a challenge when it comes to financing the administrative, the validation, verification fees, and even just to maintain a project alive on the registry, it's a cost on itself. So all these small costs, they add up and become overwhelming for small-scale project developers. The other thing that has been discussed throughout the series is inclusive project designing. So instead of passive consultation that usually stakeholder engagement requirements demand, we look at local communities as partners that should actively be involved from the onset. The idea itself, the project design itself, they should be involved in the process instead of designing a project, then imposing it on communities and running stakeholder engagement activities just to tick the box. So that's another way that we can minimize the risks that come with projects that are not suitable for the communities within which they are being implemented. And this builds on the discussion that was shared by, I think, Deborah, where he talked about the issues or the conflicts that arise sometimes from projects that the local communities are not benefiting from, and even the extent of local communities being denied access to resources because they were not involved, they did not understand, or it was not translated to them of what the project entails. And another issue that another solution, possible solution, is for Africa to regain technical sovereignty. We build skills and expertise within the local context. For example, you find that most of the projects, validation and verification bodies are not organizations that are that are based in our countries. And most of these verification and validation bodies, they come in, they do the work, and the fees associated with this work that they do doesn't remain within our communities or within the developing countries where these projects are taking place. So perhaps by developing our technical expertise and institutional capacity, we would come to a place where we have players along the value chain, including the validation and verification bodies that are local, and the cost associated with the services that they provide remain within our communities. So that's another way of addressing some of the barriers that are associated with carbon projects. And another, probably one of the key discussion points has been on benefit sharing, where benefits are shared. There is an imbalance in the way benefits are being shared. And I already touched on that. So we need to find a way on how the participation, the involvement of communities is appreciated, is rewarded by equity-based mechanisms. So instead of communities looking at communities as just beneficiaries, we look at them as partners. And probably one of the reasons why there is a challenge for us in Africa is because we are transitioning from donor-funded, no strings attached finance for conservation, and now we are looking at a market-based, transactional-based conservation. So we need to realize, we need to delink these two perceptions and look at carbon projects as business transactions. So that's one of the things that we should think around and find ways of how we can make sure that there is fair reward for the effort, for for the participation of local communities. The other solution, the other possible solution is to ensure that we shift from compliance-based reporting to strategic asset management. So what do I mean? Most projects, you find that they retain the value that is placed on most projects is not what was initially anticipated during the project designing, mainly because those projects have not proved or are not regarded as high integrity, high value projects. And one of the things is because the reporting, the monitoring, the verification itself is not rigorous enough. And mainly because of the mindset that we have that we just have to tick the box. As long as we submit reports, that's the end of it. But we have to look at it as a business whereby we are managing an asset. There is value in what every set of data that we are collecting. So that, I think, is one of the things that we could look at in terms, if we are to drive towards meaningful impact when we're talking about carbon projects. So what basically does this all entail? So in all of this, at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that there is real value in these type of projects for all that are involved. And if the initial idea was that conservation or climate change initiatives should be profitable, should be rewarding, and that polluting the environment should become more expensive, then if some of these challenges, some of these barriers are not addressed, then we'll still be lagging behind.
Just wanted to highlight some of the things that stood out for me. For example, on youth participation, one of the things you said that too many carbon projects are designed from the top down, leaving young people and communities as participants in name, but not in practice. And I think a lot of us who work in this space or who are studying, etc., can see this sort of playing out. And your solution for this was more inclusive project design, where communities and youth should not be an afterthought in projects, but should be co-architects or co-creators from the very beginning. And one other thing that you mentioned was when communities carry the most environmental risk, but receive the smallest share of the benefits, the long-term sustainability of the carbon market is compromised. And I think that's very important, especially for the project implementers, to realize that the communities, the buy-in from communities and young people is the most important aspect of the project, because the communities are the ones who keep the project running even after they finished implementing the project. And I think it also makes it equitable, because as they as they're the ones who bear the biggest burden, as you've said, they should also have a stake in the decision making. And I absolutely enjoyed your talk. Let me just ask Kathy's question first, which says, when you're identifying a possible project, do you use any form of climate simulation to assist in identifying where a project or which project would have the best results for the communities and the climate? So that's the first question. Sahibu, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Sahibu. I have a background in environmental resource management. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. And my question is, because just a background to my question, there's this company that was founded in 2019, officially launched in 2019 in Kenya by the name Coco Networks. And it has somewhat collapsed. This is 2026. So the collapse of Coco Networks in 2026 really shows that carbon subsidized models are incredibly fragile. So how can aspiring young entrepreneurs or just businesses try and build um, businesses that do not depend entirely on the government letters or authorizations? Because just a background to how Coco networks actually collapsed is because mainly because the government pulled the plug, and they thought they are going to mop up too much of Kenya's own national emission reduction targets, so that would leave the country with nothing to show for their own climate goals. So how do businesses just build sustainable um, um, companies that do not depend on these whims of government? Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for those two questions. I'll start with the first one. So, when, as I had indicated during my talk, that the expertise or the gap that is there, in the expertise of carbon projects, often results in projects that have been simulated at a global level by experts who are engaged to develop these projects on behalf of the project proponent. And oftentimes, yes, these simulations are done, but are not as refined as they should be, because each community is different, each culture is different. So oftentimes these kind of social and cultural sensitivities are often overlooked. So that's one of my observations that I have seen. And one of the projects that I have participated in usually involved setting up a pilot on a small piece of land. Although this project was on a private land, but it helped to give direction and pivot that project towards solutions that might work within that context. So it is important, I agree, that we consider all the possible scenarios, all the possible factors that might affect that project in the long run. And going to the second question on projects collapsing after the government has pulled out. So one of the points that has been shared within the series is that there is need for bundled benefits within the project. So apart from the carbon credits themselves, what else can we can add value to this project? What else can improve or can uplift the livelihood of communities? So instead of getting only carbon credits, there should be other ecosystem services that we could sell. So we're talking of soil carbon these days, sustainable land management credits that are being issued for climate smart agriculture initiatives. So what else can we add on top of the carbon that we are trying to sequester, so that this project has multiple streams or multiple ways of generating revenue? So that's what I can add, or I can say, on those two questions that had been asked.
And Claudia is asking, Do you have any examples of successful projects already taking place, and why are they successful? And the second question is from Victorine. She asks, my question is the following one. How to assess initial situation like reference for a mitigation project in the field of agroecology area? Do you have any tips, tools, or some process, a process knowing that most of the time training centers ignore measurement ways, and there can be also a lack of documentation or data. So there are two questions.
Yeah, so one of the examples that I can give within the local context here in Malawi, there was a project, one of the earlier ones. It's called the Trees of Hope project. And basically, this project shifted from just tree planting alone, but it also focused on other benefits, which included agroforestry practices and economic incentives for the communities that are involved in that project. So in the end, basically, the project had multiple benefits in addition to the carbon credits themselves. So, for example, under Vera, most projects now, most high integrity, high value projects are trying as much as they can, not only to get certification for carbon alone, but also certification for climate, community, and biodiversity initiative or benefits that come with such projects. So most of the time you find that these projects will get certification for these two standards: the afforestation, reforestation projects, then and the climate, community, and biodiversity benefits that come with those projects. So it would be wise when we are looking at developing, especially projects that involve local communities, on what other certification standards are there that we can take advantage of, instead of having a narrow, tunnel vision looking at carbon credits alone. Let's think of what other standards can we get certified so that we maximize the benefits that we can realize from such projects. Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't say I have specific tools, but for most young people now, we should leverage the opportunities that are there when it comes to having access to resources or having access to knowledge and documented success stories that are there. So what I can say on this is that there are a lot of tools, and usually the carbon space, there is a lot of documents which would be a challenge to really go through each and every tiny detail. But I am sure that there is a lot of hubs, there is a lot of initiatives that are aiming at providing young people with access to the knowledge, the skills, and the expertise that they need to be part or to contribute significantly towards within the carbon space. So I wouldn't say I have specific tools for you, but I am sure there are a lot of initiatives that are there. There is a lot of digital material, digital documentation on the different ways that projects would be successful. So for me, it's just to say, let's take advantage of these resources that are there, that are out there, and try to weigh which ones really work for us and which ones might not work for us, because there is documentation that has worked probably in the West but might not really work for us in Africa. So at the end of the day, it's about us realizing, asking, understanding what do we want, instead of trying to fit into models that have already been shaped or has already been established elsewhere.
And I think that's the important part about what you mentioned in your talk about the people who bear the burden and most of the cost of these projects, the African communities, the African youth, and those who work with them, to be able to participate, I think, in decision making at the early stage of these projects is of utmost importance, because then solutions that are created to some of the problems that you also mentioned, that project implementers may not necessarily understand the social context, which is important for implementing projects. And so including these communities and the young people within these communities, within the projects, helps mitigate some of these challenges that they're currently facing, and also to give ownership to these projects, to the people who live within these project areas is of importance. And I think what you've done today, Vitu, is of the utmost importance. Sorry, because these are some questions that we may have, or that some of us may have in this group, and haven't been able to come up with clear solutions that are quite precise and practical, especially when implementing projects that involve people, large groups of people who are in these areas. Vitu, what are your call to action, your final words for us this evening, that you'd like to give the young people in this room, the young at heart, the organizers, the project managers in this room? What is your call to action for us?
Thank you, Samantha. I think my last words in this conversation would be that we need to, as young people, we need to take ownership, equip ourselves to dominate and contribute towards meaningful projects that benefit our communities, that benefit the communities within which we have grown up, with the communities with which we interact, instead of leaving the space for people that come here from elsewhere to provide solutions to us. We have the capacity, we have the potential to rise up and take our rightful place when it comes to providing solutions to problems, to challenges that are there within our communities. And this goes beyond carbon projects themselves. We have to have an impact within our communities. If it is within the carbon space, then so be it. Let us become those verifiers of projects. Let us validate our own projects. Let us design our own projects that work for us, that work for our communities, and the benefits remain within our communities. That would be my call to action to wrap up our conversation today.
Mm. Thank you so much, Vitu. And I think, just to add to that, it also speaks to what you said about donor funding, dwindling over the past year, to show that we actually need to come up with sustainable solutions. And I love what you said about business models coming up. And it actually goes to the comment by Roland in the chat about scaling, being able to design projects that are scalable, and that are business oriented, and so that there are also financial institutions that he's saying would finance such projects. And he's also mentioning, which actually touches on what you said, that these new projects should avoid copy paste in the implementation, and need to be context specific to the local communities. And I think that's something that when we take ownership of such projects, we're able to know how to implement them because we're from that area. We understand the context, we understand what type of solutions or rather challenges are there and the solutions that would help, especially within the conservation and carbon credit space.